The sound of machines grinding to a halt, steel mills dimming their furnaces, factory workers collecting final paychecks. What started as a trade dispute has exploded into something far more dangerous, a full-scale economic war between the world's two superpowers. And caught in the crossfire, America's industrial heartland. The trade conflict between Washington and Beijing has reached a breaking point that no one expected, transforming from diplomatic tension into economic warfare that's sending shockwaves through global markets. But while politicians throw punches from comfortable offices, real Americans in places like Detroit are watching their livelihoods vanish. Michigan's manufacturing sector is raising the alarm, and what's happening there could be just the beginning of an economic disaster that threatens to spread nationwide. Michigan, once the proud symbol of American industrial might, is now sending out distress signals. With nearly $540 billion in annual manufacturing value, over a third tied directly to the automotive industry, the state finds itself uniquely vulnerable to trade disruptions. The numbers tell a devastating story. Small and medium-sized firms employing over 70,000 Michigan workers have reported production declines of 12 to 15% in recent months. Many are teetering on the edge of bankruptcy heading into 2025. Factory shutdowns that seemed unthinkable just months ago now loom as a very real possibility. Manufacturing is in our hearts, but the trade war is crushing us, reads one Michigan newspaper headline. Local union leaders warn that mass layoffs and wage cuts are becoming inevitable as the conflict intensifies. While politicians promise these aggressive tariffs would protect American jobs, the reality on factory floors tells a different story. Such harsh tariffs may protect some sectors in the short term, but Michigan is taking a multi-million-dollar hit on exports. State officials now admit privately, the escalation has been relentless. The U.S. has raised tariffs on Chinese goods to a staggering average of 145% in early 2025, with White House sources hinting at potential increases to 245% on certain products. Beijing immediately countered with retaliatory duties of 125% or more on American exports. But China didn't stop there. They've canceled major Boeing orders, slapped 25% tariffs on American agricultural products, and threatened to restrict exports of critical rare earth elements needed for everything from smartphones to military equipment. Nearly a quarter of all trade between the two countries now faces some form of tariff barrier. The global supply chain isn't just strained, it's fracturing. American manufacturers face skyrocketing costs for inputs while Chinese exporters are laying off workers as their access to U.S. consumers disappears. The bitter irony? Both sides insist they're winning while their economies bleed. Detroit's automotive industry, which barely survived the 2008 financial crisis, now faces another existential threat. The big three, GM, Ford, and Stellantis, are caught in an impossible position. The parts they need from China cost significantly more due to tariffs, while the vehicles they hope to sell to Chinese consumers face equally punishing import duties. This double squeeze is forcing automakers to consider drastic cost-cutting measures that inevitably lead to one outcome: job losses. We are the weakest link in the chain. Even the slightest change in price can destroy us, one auto parts supplier admitted. The massive network of 45,000 manufacturing firms across Michigan, from small machine shops to major parts suppliers, is being strangled by this tariff spiral. Many won't survive a prolonged trade war. If Chinese imports of everything from electronics to textiles remain blocked, retail prices could soar across America, potentially triggering an inflationary spiral that hits consumers already struggling with high prices. The trade deficit that these policies aim to close could instead mutate into something far worse: a full-blown recession starting in manufacturing-heavy states like Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. The political implications are enormous. These battleground states helped elect Trump with promises of manufacturing revival. Now they're witnessing economic devastation instead. China isn't escaping unscathed. Its growth rate fell below 6% at the end of 2024, dangerously low for a developing economy with so many mouths to feed. Economists warn growth could plummet further in 2025 if the trade war continues. While China can pivot toward Asian markets and strengthen European ties, losing access to American consumers represents a devastating blow. Almost 18% of Chinese exports previously went to the United States. Trade worth hundreds of billions annually, now disrupted by escalating tariffs. The Chinese government publicly rallies its people around messages of national pride and resistance, but behind closed doors, officials are scrambling to contain the damage. We will give new incentives if necessary, they've promised nervous business leaders. State-owned enterprises and strategic industries receive government support, but private businesses and small producers are suffering. How can we afford these tariffs? They ask as export orders vanish and domestic demand weakens. The conflict has metastasized far beyond manufacturing. Aviation, technology, agriculture, all have become battlegrounds in this economic Cold War. China canceled massive orders from Boeing while imposing punishing tariffs on American soybeans and other agricultural products. Smartphones, computer chips, and telecom equipment face embargoes or extreme tariffs based on security concerns. The United States has crippled Chinese tech giant Huawei with sanctions that devastated its global smartphone business. This widening gulf between the world's largest economies threatens the entire global trading system. Auto manufacturers from Germany to Japan warn that a prolonged U.S.-China trade war could trigger a worldwide economic collapse. The interconnected nature of modern supply chains means no country remains untouched. An estimated 35% of global trade volume flows through either the U.S. or China. If their confrontation persists, global growth could drop by 1 to 2 percentage points through 2027, potentially costing millions of jobs worldwide. President Trump remains determined to fulfill his Make America Great Again promises, particularly his pledge to revitalize American manufacturing. His supporters applaud the aggressive tariffs as necessary medicine for decades of unfair Chinese trade practices. But the reality of modern manufacturing is far more complex than campaign slogans suggest. Supply chains are deeply integrated across borders. When parts can't be sourced from China, American companies must find alternative suppliers, almost always at higher costs that squeeze profit margins and increase consumer prices. The administration counsels patience, insisting short-term pain will yield long-term gains for American industry. Yet states like Michigan worry that if factories close during this adjustment period, they'll never reopen. A recession beginning in the Midwest could spread nationwide, creating enormous political challenges for the Trump administration. As this high-stakes game of economic chicken continues, analysts debate which superpower can withstand the most damage. Some believe America's more diversified economy gives it an edge in a prolonged standoff. Others argue China's authoritarian government can absorb more social pain without facing political consequences. One thing is certain, the cost is already enormous and growing daily. From laid-off factory workers in Michigan to shuttered workshops in China, real people are paying the price for this geopolitical showdown, the most alarming possibility that neither side backs down. If the U.S. and China permanently sever their economic ties, the world economy could fracture into competing blocs. Manufacturing would undergo a massive disruptive realignment. Michigan's suffering would multiply across both nations, triggering widespread job losses, slower innovation, and higher prices for consumers everywhere. The U.S. threatens to impose 245% tariffs if China escalates further. China promises it can outlast American pressure. Neither leader wants to appear weak by making the first conciliatory move. Some observers hope external factors, a natural disaster, geopolitical crisis, or diplomatic breakthrough, might force both sides back to the negotiating table. But the current trajectory points toward continued escalation through at least 2026 to 2027. In the meantime, producers frantically search for alternative markets, consumers brace for higher prices, and manufacturing centers like Michigan struggle with profound uncertainty. China watches its growth momentum stall while unemployment rises, potentially trapping its economy before it reaches developed status. Third countries like Vietnam, Mexico, and India may ultimately benefit by filling gaps in disrupted supply chains. But building new production capacity takes years. Factories worth billions can't materialize overnight. Until then, workers on both sides of the Pacific share the same anxiety. Will my job survive this trade war? Urgent calls for a global trade summit have come from international organizations, business groups, and academic experts. But with strong leadership on both sides refusing to compromise for fear of appearing weak, the economic Cold War shows no signs of thawing.